No?
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, cool. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for turning out. Very grateful to see so many people interested in game development. Um, my name is Patrick I teach over at Dallas College. I teach game design and programming, and I also do indie development, obviously. I kind of got my start actually at a club very much like this down in Austin. And so, I just want to really, thank you and encourage you guys for participating in this stuff because this is where you're going to meet a lot of connections that will help you on down the line, a lot of friends to, talk about games, design games with. So, interacting with people like this is just, a really great opportunity. So, a little bit about this game. It is called Changes, and we'll see more of it in just a second. It was made primarily by me. I did most of the programming and the design work on it, and all of the writing and audio. My friend Heather, she did a lot of the programming kind of at the beginning of the project, and then Kaden who's the former SGDA president, she did all of the art assets, the textures and the models and things like that. So this is a puzzle game, a block pushing puzzle game. It started development in 2018, April of 2018. So it's been, long time, 3.5 years. During that time, it's been mostly part-time development. So, within that time, there have been month-long stretches where, I wasn't really working on the game. And I wanted to mention that because I think it's a really good advantage that you have as an independent developer, right? Assuming that, you can actually be sort of financially independent and not feel like, oh, I need to ship my game tomorrow or else I'm not going to eat. So by having that sort of extra time, you're able to think about your game for a very long time and think about kind of all of the details. And a lot of times that can lead to solutions to design problems that you might not be able to brute force your way through. If anyone has, experience programming, you're probably aware sometimes the brute force solution can take a really long time. So if you're able to just kind of make some sort of insight on things, that can be very advantageous. So the plan I have for this talk is I'm going to go ahead and kind of showcase the game, talk a lot about the design. I gave out a questionnaire, and it seemed like most students were interested in the design of the game and a little bit about the development process. So things like avoiding burnout, budget, working with other people, things like that. So I'm going to primarily focus on those issues and talk about the game. I do want to leave a lot of time at the end for Q&A and just kind of general discussion. So if people have questions about programming or audio or just anything in the world, I'd be happy to ask them. Because I feel like those things kind of go better as, a group discussion that we can foster rather than me just giving you a bunch of information. So this is the game Changes. I can go ahead and move around here on this grid. And as we can see, there's all of these different little worlds that I can go ahead and move around to. So one of the design principles I had for a puzzle game is I wanted to make a game that was very open, that the player could go anywhere and look at any puzzle in their investigation. Because as someone that plays a lot of puzzle games, I often get stuck in puzzle games, and it's like that sort of funneling effect where you have, I've solved 8 out of 10 puzzles, but these last 2 I'm just completely stuck on. So I wanted to see about making a game that was completely open, where you could really go and explore any level just like the way you could, pick up a book and read any page. It might not make sense, but there's something nice about the freedom of being able to do that. So here we can take a look at the first level here. And this level is a bit strange for a first level of a puzzle game, in that it's kind of meant to go ahead and overwhelm the player a little bit and just kind of show them a lot of surprising and unexpected types of events. Normally in a puzzle game, you don't want to do this. You want to give them something that, makes sense and is tangible that they can interact with. But I was really interested in this idea of kind of introducing the player to the themes of the game and giving them a sense that it's okay to maybe not understand exactly what's going on at first. And that way they'll feel more comfortable later on when they get stuck, because there will still be this kind of, sense of wonder and awe. So if I go ahead and move here, we'd see there's a little bit of text kind of explaining what the game is. So all of these guys that you see here are called cells. And the raised ones that you see are alive. And everything else on the board is dead. So each cell is surrounded by 8 neighbor cells. And every time the game updates, each generation, cells are going to die. They're going to get born. And some of them are going to live. So, obviously, as the player is going through and exploring this stuff, there's really not much of a puzzle yet. But they may notice this glowing icon right here. And stand there to see that they solved the puzzle. So, this puzzle here is meant to illustrate just the first idea that standing on the gold square beats the puzzle. So if the player learns one thing here, that's the idea. Now in this next level, I kind of take a step back and I'm going to explain things in much more explicit details. So I sort of waffled on this a lot. For those of you that are in computer science, you may be familiar with a thing known as John Conway's Game of Life. It's a very common, first semester type of thing that you program. And this game is sort of set inside of those rules. So I waffled around a lot on if I should actually teach the player those rules or sort of let them learn those rules through the gameplay. This is a very common attribute of puzzle games, is that a lot of times they teach you kind of without words. But the reason I made this decision to actually go ahead and lay out the rules very explicitly is I wanted the player to be able to focus on the things that the game is actually about. And this is kind of maybe my first game design lesson or takeaway that I would have here. And that is that you want to be able to listen to your game and think very long and very hard about what the game is actually about. What are you trying to communicate? And what is the game communicating to you? What is the things that it's showing you are interesting about it? And I realized that the thing that was interesting about this game was not really learning these rules. So I decided to just go ahead and tell the player so that they can move on to the interesting things. So the first rule is that a cell is born if it has 3 live neighbors. So we can go ahead and move now. And a cell survives if it has 2 or 3 live neighbors. So now as the player is kind of moving around and experimenting here, they can see, okay, well, that guy in the center is constantly there. And I'm getting this kind of oscillating pattern where these blinking things kind of appear and then they go away. And they appear, they go away. So the third rule is that a cell dies if it has less than 2 neighbors or more than 3 neighbors. So the player can go ahead and solve that one now. Now, I don't necessarily expect that the player has memorized those rules by this point. So it's important to give them some more context for that. Just show them more examples of this. But you want to keep those examples interesting and dynamic, right? Whenever you're trying to teach, anyone anything, but particularly someone playing a game, if you show them something and then just move beyond it, right, they're likely not going to keep it in their head. But if you show them it over and over and over again, that part of their brain is going to turn off because you're not really giving them any new, novel information. So what I do right here is introduce the player to really what I would consider kind of the first puzzle of the game. So if they move around here, they might try standing on this gold thing that they've seen before, but clearly that's not the solution to the puzzle. So they can go ahead and press undo a little bit and go ahead and try pushing this thing now. Okay, still no luck stepping on that gold piece there. So maybe they need to try getting this thing out of the way. And as they're experimenting with this stuff, they probably notice that, there's this weirdly suspicious thing up here in the top corner that I've seen before. So maybe I need to go ahead and do something with that. But, of course, it's not that simple, otherwise it wouldn't be much of a puzzle. So there's one kind of final gotcha here, where once the player sort of has made some insight about the game, I need to push this thing over here, there's sort of one more lesson for them to learn. And that's that because this thing is oscillating, right, they're sort of out of phase with this thing. So maybe they're going to come over here and try pushing it one more time, go, okay, there we go. I've now solved that puzzle. So again, this puzzle is kind of a variation on that same idea. It's obviously a very similar puzzle to the one that we just saw before. And this is what's introducing kind of the last, what I would consider mechanic of the game, the ability for the player to press the space bar to go ahead and pass. And this is something that comes up a lot in the game. There are going to be some more puzzles that kind of reinforce this idea. But if you just want everything to evolve without you moving, you can go ahead and press space. And this allows you to kind of do a more efficient way of pushing this thing over. And now, we have the same sort of phase problem that we had before, but now you kind of have a tool that you can use to deal with it. So, with just these three puzzles, right, I've kind of introduced the player to the core mechanics of the game. And I think that this is the thing that puzzle games are really good at. And this is actually one of the reasons I was interested in designing a puzzle game, is puzzle games are very good at teaching the player concepts about the simulation that they're in, without necessarily doing too much hand-holding, and allowing the player to do a lot of experimentation and a lot of, developing a lot of their own insights about what's going on. And I don't think that that's a property unique to puzzle games by any means, but I think puzzle games are a really good way to practice that. And if you look at a lot of great games, like, pick any Mario game, they also do a lot of the same techniques. So one other thing that I wanted to teach the player here in this tutorial is that they're able to encounter puzzles that they might not be able to solve yet. And I want them to be able to understand that concept and be able to sort of move beyond without having to fear, like, I missed some critical piece of information. I can't go anywhere until I solve this particular puzzle. And this was actually a thing, sort of a design lesson that I got from the game Braid, where in Braid there was this puzzle piece that was like very hard and far out of reach. And, it was sort of meant to signify to the player that, you can't get here, just move beyond. As someone that's taught design for several years, though, I know that a lot of players are going to see that and they're going to try everything, right? They're going to be on that for 20, 30 minutes, trying all sorts of different combinations. So my idea here was I just wanted to make a puzzle that didn't actually have a solution at all, right? It was more of just a sort of visual showcase or like a little set piece that you could look at. So as I move around here, we see this diagonal guy is moving in this kind of interesting way. And so far, all of the rules that we've seen haven't said anything about moving. And so one of the things that I say in the text in this game is that the three rules that you've already learned really are the entirety of the rules of the game. Everything that you're going to see from here on out follows from those three rules. This isn't a game where I'm adding, a fifth mechanic, a sixth mechanic, so on and so forth. So something really cool about Conway's Game of Life, and, by virtue of being set in Conway's Game of Life changes, is that there's this cool property that behavior kind of emerges from form. And there's this set of very interesting emergent properties that happen from a system that aren't really anything that you as the game designer put in the game. It's not like, I have a cool idea for a weapon, let me go do a bunch of coding and go ahead and do that. It's more like the type of competitive play that emerges, in a, esports game, where these are kind of properties that are being discovered rather than implemented in the game itself. So we can go ahead and end the level here. And I'm not going to go through the entire game linearly like this, obviously. I just kind of wanted to showcase some of the tutorial levels. So this next section, I think, illustrates another very interesting idea in puzzle games, and another kind of virtue that I think you discover when you're working on them, is that puzzle games are very good about being about particular ideas and about illustrating those ideas to the player. And one of the cool things that you can do when you are working kind of in an idea space is you can create variations. So much like you have in music or writing, where you might have some sort of basic form, but you go ahead and vary it in some way to introduce a new element of it. This is one of the earlier puzzles that I developed in the game. And the basic idea here is just, this thing is going to die. Like if I just press space a bunch and let it die, we're all very sad because it's gone. That's no good. So maybe I need to save it in some way. And of course, the way that I save it is just by moving straight towards it. So not a complicated puzzle by any means. But I think this is a thing that at least I sort of had a misconception of puzzle games, maybe not right when I started designing this game, but earlier on. The goal of a puzzle game, or really any game at all, is not to be challenging, right? The goal of the game is to be interesting and to show the players things that they might not have known about before. Now, sometimes that is challenging, right? I mean, if you play competitive Smash, that's a very hard game, and you learn lots of cool things from other people. But really, just the fact that it's hard is not what is engaging, right? The fact that there's a lot of variety and depth to it is, at least I think, the thing that, kind of keeps me coming back. So here's an example of a sort of variant on this idea. So we have the same basic pattern, right? Some things are going to die. You want, this little block in the center to solve the level. Maybe you just go, hey, what if I just go over here? Is it going to happen by itself? Okay, nope, that would obviously be too easy. What if I just stand right here? Well, again, nothing's going to happen. So the idea here is to kind of subvert the idea of the last puzzle, right? If the last puzzle was about moving straight towards the thing, then the idea of this puzzle is kind of getting out of the way, right? And once you get out of the way, then you are in a better position to actually go ahead and do something. And then a third variation on this is always a cool thing whenever you're working on games. If you can find ideas that you're able to keep varying to create little areas of interest and intrigue that you hadn't expected, that usually tells you that you're kind of on a good path and that there's kind of a richness to the space to explore. And again, this doesn't just apply to puzzle games, right? If you're making a multiplayer game and your playtesters do something you never expected, maybe they did an exploit and the game's broken now, but maybe they did something really cool. And it's worth paying attention to that stuff and seeing if there's something there that the game is trying to show you about the way that it's designed. So this puzzle here, very similar to the setup before, but obviously I can't reach there in time. So this puzzle is just kind of meant to illustrate that, if I am on the edge here, I can actually go ahead and wrap around. And that this space isn't just visually sort of stretching out to infinity and wrapping around, but that you're actually able to move around, from one side to the other. And again, a lot of players will have probably already figured this out by this point in the game, just by the process of trying to solve the other levels. But it's good to have a level to explicitly show it to them. So, I said in the beginning, I was kind of talking about this idea of listening to the game, right? And seeing what the game is communicating. So, when I was designing some of these earlier levels, there was a lot of thought about, the directions that the game could go, right? Maybe the game is going to get much bigger with more complicated structures, right? Maybe these are the only interesting puzzles in the game and I've kind of exhausted the possibility space and it's time to, put the project away and go do something else. Well, something that I thought was interesting is that as I was sort of playing around with these puzzles, I started to notice what I would kind of consider like narratives starting to emerge. And I think part of this is kind of lended from just the aesthetics of the game of life. Anytime you say, something's about life and death, it's going to sound grand and important, right? And you're going to, maybe pay attention. But what I thought was cool about this is kind of all of these puzzles were about this thing in jeopardy, right? And being in a position where you are able to help out, right, and kind of give things, a little push in the right direction, rather than just letting them, decay and die. So I was curious about that, and I wanted to kind of start exploring that space further. So some of these other puzzles are about, and really all of the other puzzles in the game, are about this idea of using these puzzle mechanics to actually tell, rather small, but I still think interesting types of narratives. So if we go ahead and look at this puzzle here, this is kind of the last, little rule for the player to figure out. And this is another thing that I think is interesting about puzzle games, that there are kind of two schools of thought on. So these little blue pads here, I can see that clearly the game is not letting this puzzle be solvable, right? Even though these two things, everything I know so far tells me that this should be possible. So clearly these guys must be like negating this in some way. So maybe I try, killing it. Okay, well that's not going to work. Maybe I try pushing it up and killing it. Okay, well I'm not going to get there in time either. So maybe I just try getting this out of the way and doing that. So those pads are sort of saying that there can't be a spot available on that little spot on the grid. There can't be a cell there. And, the reason that I felt like those were necessary is with everything that you've seen so far in the game, it would be possible to create these kind of, unintended solutions to them, right? And sometimes those can be really cool. Like, at least for myself, I really like when I'm playing a game and I figure out a clever way to do things, right? I mean, this happens in, you find out how to sequence break in Metroid, or you find out, kind of how to exploit a boss in Dark Souls, and all of a sudden a guy that was beating you to death is just, he's a chump. So this is something that I, sort of went into the game. I was considering the idea of having multiple solutions. But I think there's something really beautiful about a game that is sort of showing you a single, absolute truth about the way that it's structured. And that, if you allow for multiple solutions, the player might find something that's interesting, right? But they aren't necessarily going to find the thing that you're trying to show them is interesting. And I think that's a thing that all players kind of feel when they're playing a game, is when there's a direct line of communication between themselves and the designer, and it's almost like you're having a dialogue. The designer comes and shows you something, and you go, oh, wow, that's really cool. And then she goes and shows you something else, and you're like, wow, that was also really cool. What else is here, right? But, in a sort of system like this, you need kind of constraints on the possibilities of what's going on there. So this is another level that was kind of designed a little early on. This is, another aspect of puzzle games I think is interesting, is as you're working on them, you're kind of figuring out the game in the same way that the player does. And I think that's really beautiful, because none of these puzzles in the game are like, I have an idea. The player will go up, up, down, right, and that's the solution to the puzzle, and they have to, figure that out somehow. It's more like I'm asking a question about, what does the system do, right? What are certain possibilities? What are things that the player hasn't seen? And then I'm sort of constructing these scenarios for them to experience. And I think that leads to, personally, I think that leads to really interesting design. So the question I had here was, again, a little bit of this narrative idea. I was kind of thinking, okay, well, if you've got these little blinking guys kind of oscillating like that, what are some things that could happen with them? Well, what if you needed to destroy one of them, right? Well, you destroy that guy, and okay, great. On the left-hand side, there are no cells where there shouldn't be any. So maybe I go ahead and push this guy around, and I feel very good that I just solved the puzzle. Oh, wait. This isn't good, because these things are in phase with each other, right? And what I actually want is I want these things to be out of phase, right? Because when this guy's vertical, this other guy's also vertical, but I need him to be horizontal. So, maybe you try a lot of different, things to get kind of tricky with the game. Maybe you push these things together and see what happens. That's not really looking like it's going to solve the puzzle. but it's pretty cool, I think. So maybe we go ahead and restart. And then when you're looking at this with the little bit of information that you've gleaned so far, you're like, oh, wait, hold on. I killed this thing over here, but this is exactly the piece that I want. That's actually kind of sad. I didn't really value this piece. I just stomped on it. So maybe this is the thing that I need to get rid of now. And I can say, oh, okay. Here we go. I can push this guy over some more. Then push him there, and voila. So that puzzle suggested to me that there were maybe things going on with these shapes and with sort of the way that the player would be interpreting and thinking about them that might lead to some interesting possibilities. And the way that I started to think about this in the design was kind of treating it like looking at clouds, right? If you go and you lay out on a field and look at clouds, you start to see certain shapes there. And to some degree, you are literally, putting something where there's nothing. There's just a cloud there. There's not a cute, fluffy rabbit. There's not, a boat. But it's kind of cool that the mind is able to do that and able to sort of interpret these patterns and add meaning into them. So I started to kind of think about the design of the game in this way. And so this area over here, and really kind of all of the areas, are kind of grouped together around certain themes that the game is exploring. And something I think is cool is sometimes those themes are sort of purely themes, right? It's just, oh, here's an idea, let's go ahead and explore it. But something that I think is also really cool is sometimes there's kind of a direct connection between the theme that the game is exploring and the shape that you're exploring. So there's this nice confluence of, oh, well, I'm teaching you these things about the mechanics or about this particular entity in the game, but I'm also sort of using that technique to explore ideas. So this area over here is kind of all about our little shape, the block, that we've seen before. And this puzzle, I think, illustrates another, interesting sort of trait of game design that I didn't necessarily think about it this way before. So we've got the block over here on the left, and we've got these blocks over here on the right that we clearly need to push it towards. Well, I could go ahead and, just try moving over there to explore, but that's no good because this thing's going to get destroyed, right? So I could try moving it really quickly over here. Just go, oh, hey, I'll move really fast. Okay. Well, that's not so good. This is a little out of control now. So this was another thing that, I didn't necessarily think of going into the game, but, I found this pretty early. I liked the idea of a puzzle game where the failure state was not this static and kind of frustrating thing. A lot of times when you play a puzzle game, you're just staring at something for a long time. You're sort of imagining it in your head. Maybe you keep pushing a block into a corner, right? I think we've all been stuck on puzzles before. And I was interested in this idea of kind of exploring how you could use failure to teach the player something about the game. And, honestly, I think a lot of games do this, particularly these days, like even games like Dark Souls where failure is maybe very frustrating, or Breath of the Wild or something. There's still something cool about like running around in Breath of the Wild and getting zapped to death because you were holding, a sword in an electric storm. It's cool, like, I'm mad that I'm dead, but I'm also like, oh, wow, I didn't know that about the world. Maybe I could use this in some way. So another thing that I think is kind of cool about this puzzle and about the idea, obviously there's a little bit of a narrative structure here again, right? We've kind of got this block and, he's getting hunted down by this, very obnoxious glider that will just not leave us alone. But, we can't just destroy it because, we need it there. And what I thought was cool about this, because, I kind of had two versions of this puzzle. One of them was just, an empty board where you just sort of have the blocks over here on the right. And that puzzle is something like a sentence, right? It's just saying, hey, you know what? You could go ahead and get this block over here. It's possible to do this, and you need to figure out how. The thing is, though, that there's a couple of problems with that. One is it's a very open space, right? You aren't really telling anything to the player other than, oh, hey, this thing exists. Like, find out how. And that's not necessarily the most engaging, line of communication. If games are about communicating with the player, that version of the puzzle is just kind of like giving them a block and closing the door to the room and saying, you figure it out, like come back when you're done. So by adding the constraint to the puzzle, where it's sort of like you have to get it done in a certain amount of time, you can't, dilly-dally because this thing's coming after you, it actually adds a little bit of both narrative to it, but it also, I think, makes it a better puzzle, where the player is more directed towards the intended solution. And, I think that's pretty cool, and something that, again, I definitely take into my work that isn't related to puzzle design. That idea of both using failure, but also using constraints to kind of direct the player and show them things about the game. So all of these puzzles in this area are kind of about these little block guys, right? And about the different things that you can do with them. And there's a lot of interesting kind of variety, I think, in the way that the stories unfold, right? So this guy right here, it's a very similar situation, right? It's just clearly I need to get him out of the way, right? So maybe I can try doing that. Okay, wait, hold on. This guy's going to clip him, right? Okay, so maybe I stand here and stop him, but that's not going to work. It's clearly getting out of hand again. So it's both kind of showing you something about the puzzle and about showing you something about the properties of how the systems work. But it's also kind of showing you an interesting thing about how this puzzle is solved. So what you think is a simple puzzle about, oh, I just pushed the block out of the way, that's actually boring, I know how to do that. It kind of has a sort of hidden solution to it, which, when people play it, I think they find that this is actually, kind of a, it's kind of a cute solution, right? It's something that's a little bit surprising, a little bit unexpected, that, shows you something, I think really nice about the system. And, that's another thing that I didn't necessarily know about this game going into it. When I was thinking about stories and the narratives of the puzzles, it's like, okay, well, sure, maybe you can tell some puzzles about, oh, a thing's being chased, get it out of the way. But, you probably don't want to tell 100 stories about that. That sounds pretty boring. So is there going to be a variety of different puzzles and a variety of different sort of ways that you can interpret and see the events that are going on here? And, I think this puzzle was kind of an example of finding that and going, yes, this is actually kind of cool. You can tell a cute story with these little basic, abstract shapes. So that was that area. And this area here is kind of about things in a different way. So this area is called reactions. And if you go into this, you see that all of these puzzles are kind of about things that are in the ways of other things and the ways that cells interact with each other. So here, I have these two little glider shapes that are moving, but, this guy's going to hit this guy. So it's kind of like a variation on those last puzzles. In the previous ones, it's like I wanted to get the block out of the way to save it. And in this one, I don't actually care about getting the block out of the way. In fact, the block is really just annoying. I hate the block. I don't want the block around anymore. So I'm going to try, doing some stuff to kill it maybe and solve the puzzle that way. Hopefully that's not too much of a spoiler there. So all of these puzzles are kind of about that concept of both sort of the timing, right, of trying to get two solutions in a particular time constraint, but also just about exploring the different ways that these things interact with each other and the different possibilities that can happen. And, this is probably biggest, maybe design lesson or takeaway that I had from the game. I certainly had a lot of examples to go from for designing puzzle games. Some of my favorite games are like Steven's Sausage Roll, The Witness, things like that. So, a lot of the design lessons, like having a good tutorial that kind of guides you through the solutions and introduces you to the mechanics. There's a lot of examples of that. But something that I kind of came across, and I don't really have a very good term for this, I kind of call it like an incidental realization. And the idea of this is just realizing something about the system that's sort of tangential to actually solving it, right? So if we just let this thing play out here, we can just see, okay, well, these gliders are going to destroy all this stuff. Maybe I just let it happen and keep looking at it, and I go, okay, well, I'm bored now. Let's go ahead and take a look again. And we see, all right, look, clearly I need to destroy these guys somehow. So let's go ahead and try to get to this guy. Okay, that's no good. So let's maybe try, like, killing this guy. Maybe I'll try something like that. Okay, well, that doesn't work. But wait, hold on a second. This thing down here, it wasn't there a minute ago, right? And oh, that's actually kind of interesting that this shape is able to turn into another shape. I mean, the game is called Changes after all, right? I would expect something to be changing. And that idea of kind of showing the player other things about the system that are sort of not related to their actual stated goals, I think is a really interesting aspect of game design. And it's something that not only do I explore a lot in this game, but I explore it in my other work too. So to give you kind of a different example, I've got a, sort of a more narrative-based game, right? Where, a character is kind of packing a bag as one of the actions that they need to take in the game. And if the player's goal is to pack the bag and, you just sort of purely let them do that, they'll probably do the action. They might even have a good time doing it. But they aren't necessarily seeing anything else about the game. But if, as they're packing the bag, maybe other characters are reacting to them, or different things are happening, right? It's like, oh, they accidentally knock an object off the shelf and the glass breaks or something, right? That's kind of an interesting line of communication where you're able to direct the player with their goal towards kind of one state of things. And as you do that, the player is able to discover other things about the system. So that idea is, something that I play around with a lot in this game. And I think some of my favorite puzzle solutions are things where you kind of have one goal that might be very basic, like destroy this thing in time, or get here to push this thing out of the way. But along the way, you sort of set off some sort of chain reaction, or you mess with some other object in the world that shows you something, kind of new and interesting about it. So, like I said, all of these puzzles are kind of about, this idea here of what's going on with the different interactions. And, something that I wanted to mention here, a puzzle, not to get too terribly personal, though I guess indie development is always pretty personal. This is a puzzle that I designed, shortly after I lost my brother last year, right around the time that COVID started. So I was isolated and in the middle of game development and, kind of grief-stricken and traumatized. And for, whatever reason, right, kind of the way that I would deal with that is by, creativity, right, exploring things. So what interests me to this, not so much the specifics of this, though, I do like this puzzle, but, or like is maybe the wrong word, but I'm proud of this puzzle. But what was interesting to me is kind of this idea of, again, with the narrative and the puzzles. Like, it's one thing to sort of see a narrative in a set of puzzles and go, yes, okay, I kind of see how that looks like a thing getting chased. That's cute. But it's another thing to kind of go in the opposite direction, right? And go, okay, can I have a certain mood or a certain feeling that I want to express or some sort of, idea that I want to communicate? And can I find a way to communicate that with the form of the particular game that I'm working in. Because obviously, we know how to do this with music, right? If you're sad, you can write a song about being sad. We can do this with a poem. If you're sad, you can write a poem about being sad or about exploring that grief. And, honestly, I was, not necessarily consciously thinking of this too much of like, oh, is this actually possible? Or, ooh, what an interesting design challenge. But it was just kind of like the thing that I was working on, right? And I thought it was actually really cool that I was able to accomplish that goal, right? That I was able to kind of make a puzzle that really communicated how I felt, right? Where there were these sort of two blocks together, and one of these blocks is just going to get, absolutely, shattered and destroyed, leaving this block alone, right? I mean, that's how I felt at the time. In a lot of ways, it's still how I feel. And it was just, I don't know, it's sort of one of those things you feel like a tremendous amount of gratitude that this is even possible, right? Like, nothing about this is really, like, innate to me, right? It's not like, oh, I'm really smart, I figured out this puzzle. It's sort of like I was able to use these pieces that already exist and use these rules that were already around to express something that, I hadn't really thought possible before. And that was, that's a puzzle I designed about a year and a half ago now. And, a lot of other puzzles that I kind of designed on down the line were kind of about sort of exploring that space, right? Can I have a particular thing, right? A particular event or idea that I'm able to, somehow communicate. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, right? There are plenty of puzzles that got cut from this game where I'm like, this is kind of forced, or maybe it communicates the idea well, but it's not very fun to discover. Which I think brings, to another interesting point of game development, at least indie game development, where again, you have a lot of flexibility, right? If you have a 2,000 person studio, you don't really want to be cutting 2,000 people's worth of content because now you paid a lot of people for nothing. But it's easy to cut content when you're a game developer or, an independent game developer. So, I think that's a thing that I would stress is don't be scared of cutting content, right? I probably cut like 400 levels from this game that were just kind of like, that's cute or that's interesting, but it's not really showing anything new or interesting to the player. So, I wanted to show one other kind of example of the incidental kind of revelation, just to kind of drive the point home. Again, this is another puzzle where, okay, if we just let this play out, those things are going to get destroyed, right? So, okay, well, I've got to get there in time. So let's try moving around this thing. Because, I see this guy up here. I clearly need to move him. I don't want to get rid of him. Maybe I try wrapping around. Can I get there in time? Nope, that's not good. So, okay, well, maybe I just need to move in a straight line, right? And okay, I can get there in time. That's really cool, but I've sort of transformed this thing, right? I wouldn't necessarily have learned how to do that puzzle necessarily on my own, but by kind of pushing the player in this direction where it's like, okay, your goal is to save the shape. But as you save the shape, you sort of realize something that you have to do to, kind of solve that, right? So, one other area that I wanted to show off, this is kind of the last area in the game, and then we can maybe open it up a little bit more towards just kind of some of the development process ideas that I learned, kind of, unassociated from the game design. Like I said, this game isn't something that's about adding a lot of new mechanics and sort of exploring like a combinatoric space of how these different things interact. But I didn't know that at the beginning of the game. And in fact, I actually have a lot of prototypes of this game where it's like, oh, let's make a pad that does this thing. Or, oh, what if you stand here and it teleports you? Oh, what if here it sort of reverses your directions? Oh, what if over here cells can't be born and cells can't die, right? Ideas like that. And I wound up cutting all of those ideas, partially just from time management, right? It's like I spent long enough on the game. But also it was like, if these three basic rules give me a ton of different puzzles, right? If I get like 100 puzzles out of 3 rules, and then I add a rule and I get like 5 puzzles, it's like, well, is that really that interesting? Is that like that good of a thing to show the player? Is it necessarily worth their time? But one of these ideas actually did stick around and, became, something that I really like. And this idea is this little red spiky guy here. If we just let this kind of play out, we can see that when a cell is born there, it actually becomes a player, right? And we can see that when a player stands there, they become a cell. So maybe if I come right here and become a cell, okay, that stuff is going to die. What if I do it right here? Again, we create this kind of, playing out effect of what's going on in the world. Maybe we do something like that. So, the goal here is kind of getting rid of the player, right? Sort of having the player step out of this puzzle for it to be solved, right? Because we see there aren't any, yellow pads here. And, this idea I kept because even though it wasn't a ton of levels, right? It's not another 100 levels of this idea. It was enough levels, and I thought that it sort of played with the themes of the game in a good way. Again, this idea of, okay, listening to your game. So what's the game about? Well, if the game is about stories and these sort of emergent possibilities, well, the extra rules that you add to the game better have stories and they better have emergent possibilities. And, luckily all of these rules actually did, while, really none of the others were particularly interesting to me, even though I spent a lot of time, thinking about them and working on them. So that's kind of, a whirlwind tour and overview of the game, right? And, some of the things that I care about in the game, some of the things that were interesting to me. There's also a whole, music system, kind of a dynamic audio system that, you could probably hear as I'm playing through the puzzles. I'd be happy to talk more about the design process for that. I do want to mention a couple of things that, people specifically asked me about on the questionnaire. So one of the things that was kind of the most common topic that people were interested in was just kind of the design process of, working on a long-term project. This is at least something that I thought a lot about when I was in school because, you do projects, maybe you spend a semester on them, you do game jams, a week or two. Maybe you have a longer-term project, right, that you work on with friends over several semesters, but maybe it's slow going, maybe you're too busy working on other things. I expect that that's, something that a lot of us can relate to. So, working on this project, like I said, there were a few things that I did to avoid burnout, and some things that I kind of realized about burnout. And I don't want to say these in any sort of like, I'm going to teach you a lesson about burnout, because honestly, I have been burnt out like the last month. I've been, nearly catatonic. So not necessarily the best person to take advice from, but, kind of over the process of paying attention to, how I feel working on this game, there's kind of a couple of types of burnout, as far as I can tell. One of them is sort of a burnout that develops from feeling overwhelmed, right? And feeling like you aren't able to make any progress and that the thing you're trying to do is just way beyond you, right? I mean, look, I'm proud of this game. I think it's really good, but this is not the largest project that any independent developer has ever, embarked upon, right? So if I'm feeling overwhelmed by this, right, clearly this is either the limit of things that I can work on, or I need some way to, go ahead and deal with that. And the thing that I, sort of came to realize about this is that a lot of times I would feel burned out just because I would, maybe procrastinate on the problem, right? And I would feel like, oh, this is really hard, let me just put it off. And the problem is when you put it off, you don't feel better the next day, right? You just go, wow, this project is still too big for me, and I'm a day behind, right? Or I'm a week behind. So, the horrible solution that I have to that is just, sometimes you do just got to go ahead and do something. But the other type of burnout, and this is the thing that I think you really have to watch out for, the solution is not just go ahead and buckle down and do it, is when you actually do feel real legitimate physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion. And honestly, I mean, I'm sure this is no surprise to y'all as students, the solution here is to just take a break, right? Obviously you can't do that in classes because, the school system is set up a certain way, but take a week off from the project, do a game jam, learn to play an instrument, do anything other than working on the game, right? Watch, binge The Sopranos or something. Just don't work on the game. Actually take a break, give it time, because it's sort of one of these processes that it's not linear, right? It's not like, oh, I feel burnt out. I'll take a 3-day vacation and then I'll come back and I will have another 6 months of work ahead of me, right? It's not like that. You need to like fully recover from burnout to actually be able to get back to work. I unfortunately did not really listen to my own advice there. Luckily, I listened to it most of the time, so it was really only in the last couple months that I was, just kind of crunching on this game and trying to get things done. So that's one piece of advice that I have for burnout. The other thing that I wanted to say, there's a question sort of about budget and development process. So, like I said at the beginning, I teach game design, which is obviously games related, but I'm not in the game industry, right? I'm not working 40 hours a week at a studio. I'm not trying to ship the demo by E3, any of those things. And I personally would really strongly recommend, and I know several other independent developers that would also recommend, if you're interested in independent development or, just side projects in general, do something that allows you a certain amount of freedom in the time that you're devoting to something, but that does give you, kind of a safety net to fall back on. So, by being able to teach, I was able to work with Caden, and I didn't have to say, oh, hey, pretty please, can you do revenue share? Or like, hey, we're friends, right? Can you do this stuff for me? I was able to say, hey, you're a talented artist, you deserve money, here's some money, right? Now, could I hire her full time? No. But, that's a thing that, you can kind of do when you have a little bit of that independence. So that's a thing I would kind of recommend as far as, budget goes. I don't have any experience with like funding of games, going to a publisher or anything. I know some people that do. And, everyone's got kind of different feelings. I didn't want to do publishing for this game just because it was strange. Like, I don't think I would have found a publisher for this. Maybe if I was really good at sales. But it was also just something like I wanted to be able to take my time with it, and I didn't want to have to feel this sort of like, this deadline approaching and, running out of money. And luckily my time is, I value my time as free. So, the budget is pretty much paying artists and doing legal fees and stuff like that. All right, so what I want to do now is just maybe open it up in general to Q&A or just any type of, topics. And, not necessarily just you ask a question and I give a long-winded answer. I would love other people to jump in and, if I'm wrong, say that you think I'm wrong. If you're kind of curious, like, oh, that doesn't sound like a good idea, that's fine. And we can just kind of have, a more open discussion. I tend to have fairly long-winded answers, so I feel like this sort of discussion might work better because that way we can have a dialogue and have a back and forth rather than me, someone asking about memory management and me going for, another 40 minutes until we leave. So any questions or thoughts? Yes?
So it seems as I played a little bit, and it seemed a little bit high concept, the game mechanics. How did you develop a design language to create puzzles with?
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. It is definitely high concept, and that was one of the hardest things to deal with, right? Because, I mean, you may have felt that in the audience, right? Just as I'm explaining the rules. I mean, I know what's going on. I can feel the energy. So one thing is just kind of having a really, what I feel like is a really strong tutorial that introduces things like piece by piece, right? 2 years ago, the tutorial was, maybe a little bit more open. So there was a little bit more exploration. Sometimes puzzles were kind of showing multiple ideas simultaneously, right? Another thing, as far as more like the design language of your question goes, is using shapes very consistently. And this is something that, again, I'm more lucked into this, right, rather than, designing for this. But you notice that in a lot of the puzzles, right? I mean, we can go to one of the last puzzles in the game, right? And, look at this. It's a glider, right? You've seen this guy over and over and over again. By this point in the game, you know what the glider is. And so I think the game would have probably not worked at all if the design language hadn't been able to focus on very basic shapes like this. If it had just kind of always expanded, like, if you're ever curious and you look up Conway's Game of Life on Wikipedia or something, I mean, people literally do like PhD research papers on, okay, with this configuration of cells, I'm able to create a thing that lives for, 398 generations and has a bounding box of this, like, that would not have worked, right? I can't even think about that, let alone ask the player to. So that's really the primary way is shape consistency, right? Having kind of patterns like this, right? Where, for example, I didn't show this puzzle, but this sort of pattern where you have gliders moving diagonally and you have blocks that they're going to kind of collide with, right? And you have to kind of get them out of the way of the blocks. That's a very common pattern. I have an example of a puzzle like that in like 5 out of the 8 worlds. So having that sort of like variation where it's like, okay, I see this is like that puzzle, but this thing is different, right? That's definitely a thing. And, you know, as far as just the design language of kind of myself, a lot of note taking. Like I said, I made a lot of levels that I cut, and a lot of those were just kind of things like, try this with a glider, try this with a glider, try this with a glider, right? And just sort of seeing like what are all of the, you know, the different possibilities. You know, I'll say if I have like an honest estimation of this game, I think that I did everything that I could with that design language and with the high concept. Do I think that I did enough of it to like give the controller to my mom and say like, hey mom, I made a game, do you want to play it? Probably not, right? It's certainly a game that is, you know, probably only for people that like puzzle games and have, you know, sort of these similar interests, right? I don't think it's like a general, you know, it would not be a free mobile game on iPhone. Or if it would, there would be a lot of, you know, very upset reviews. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, honestly, that's it. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of other, you know, you probably get a sense of this when you design a game for a long time. There's a lot of little subtle things that you don't even necessarily consciously think about, but I'm sure are going on somewhere in my head when I'm designing a level. Probably some of that is beneficial. Probably some of that is detrimental, right? Where it's just like I'm sort of closed off to certain possibilities, and it's just like I have developed kind of a you know, style that I like and that I'm able to reason about, but maybe that leaves other things on the table. One of the ideas I actually had partially implemented is I had a level editor for the game that, you know, I was going to ship with. You know, I gave it to people, and people like messing around with it, but, you know, anytime you give a level editor for, you know, a puzzle game, people play around with it for a little and go, that's cool, but also, like, I don't feel like making a game. Like, I'm here to play a game. If I wanted to make a game, I would go make my own game. So it's like a very small audience of people that want to make your puzzle game. So, you know, I didn't wind up shipping with that because it wasn't really worth the resources. But, you know, it is kind of a lingering question in my mind. Like, what, you know, what other type of, you know, game would people come up with, you know, given these rules? What other types of, you know, languages or ideas would people have? So, yeah, that's a great question. Anyone else? Yes?
What inspired the art style?
So a few things. When we started the prototype of the game, my friend Heather and I, when we started working on it, we were just thinking about lava lamps, right? We were kind of like, oh, they're cells, so what are cells, right? They're kind of goopy. We were thinking kind of like a primordial ooze type of thing. And she did some initial rendering work. Really, the first pass of the renderer was all her. There were a few difficulties with that. For one thing, cells always felt very isolated from each other. It was kind of like, you know, we did some sign distance field stuff to kind of have them like merge together in some way. But it was just always a little bit too complex, and kind of it's like, well, I could spend 8 months making the renderer look really good doing this, but maybe there was a simpler way. And, you know, I just sort of was thinking about like, okay, what are things that are kind of changing and shifting? And, you know, we already had the goop idea. So I was like, okay, what if I sort of, you know, did a graphics rendering thing that I was very comfortable with, which is like take a tessellated plane, you know, throw some noise on it, you know, sort of filter it along. It also works very well for animation. This was one of the problems with the primordial ooze. I really wanted it to seem like the cells were coming up out of something and going down into something when they died. And that was very difficult to get working with kind of the oozy SDF representation. So I figured, I mean, you know, what's easier than taking a tessellated plane and saying, hey, you guys go up, okay, now you guys go down. Then some of the other stuff was, I think, mostly just inspired by that kind of Perlin noise idea. This texture that you hopefully can see reflected in the waves here. This is actually just a Van Gogh painting. I just took a segment out of it. I just rotate the UVs like a lot over and over again with some noise, and then sort of throw that on. That was kind of from the cloud idea, right? I had this idea of like, oh, looking at clouds. I'm like, well, I really like Van Gogh clouds, so I'll go with that. As for the kind of art with the lighting and the pads underneath, this actually went through a lot of variations. This is kind of something that Kate and I arrived at together. We tried a few things, like going with the ocean theme. It's like, okay, so coral, right? Well, coral's very noisy. It's hard to distinguish from far away. It's also colorful, and it's underwater, right? So there's only so much color that's coming through. So we kind of arrived at the gym idea because I thought it would be cool with a little subsurface scattering. It would like create kind of a cool, like, oh, it's lit up from the inside type of effect. That's something we couldn't really get with the coral. And some of the other ideas we bounced around was like, oh, what if we had something floating on top of the water? But then you run into issues with, okay, well, now when like a thing gets pushed on top of it, like the animation's a little tricky. Does it need to like rise up with it? Does it float below it? Because that wouldn't make sense. So I think the art direction was kind of like a blend of what do I feel like is simple and fast enough to do, and also just what is kind of an art direction that fits the puzzle design and sort of matches what's going on. So we worked a lot. Like the lighting idea that we have here was partially because on these bigger levels, it's very easy to lose the shapes, right? They kind of blend in. So it's like, okay, well, we need them to be very apparent when a cell is on it. We need it to kind of pop out of the screen. So it's kind of, a little bit of the design guiding the art rather than thinking about the art, kind of from the beginning and then going in that direction. I would be curious, if I ever worked on a puzzle game again. I don't know if I will, but like what it would be like if I kind of had a more visual idea up front with it. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there any part of the game that you cut that you really wanted to make work, but you just had to cut it?
Yes. I'll say this is maybe kind of a more general comment about shipping a game. There were parts of the game that I really wanted to cut, or that I really wanted to keep when I cut them. There are no parts of the game that I really wanted to keep that I cut now. I'm like, yeah, I'm so glad that they're done. But there were definitely a lot of things. I mentioned the sort of pads where, like, when you were standing on them, it would sort of reverse your direction. That had some cool, I think, narrative things where it's kind of like if you had multiple player cells, they would kind of like work against each other. It's like, oh, you move with this guy, but this guy's a jerk and he's going to knock this guy out of the way, right? That seemed really interesting to me, and I had some puzzles that I thought were cool there, but it was just kind of like, it's sort of kind of a time investment, right? It's like I kept trying and I kept going, and eventually it was just a point. It's like, I like this idea, it is cool, but is it harmful to everything else in the game? Does it show the player cool things? And that was the big reason that I wound up cutting it, is because all of those puzzles, they essentially didn't have anything to do with the actual transformations. They more had to do with this kind of like, oh, the players are getting in each other's way. And, it was like, okay, well, how much would the player even enjoy those at that point? Because they aren't learning anything new. They're just kind of getting in the way of themselves. There are definitely like more individual puzzles on a less like mechanical idea that definitely like I would love for them to work, but it's also just sort of like, accepting the fact that like it's just not going to work. It's a cool idea. Like this solution, the correct solution is great, but there are so many wrong solutions that are just like a huge bummer. And I'm not sure that there isn't a way to solve some of them. In fact, actually, like a week ago, there was a puzzle that I was about to cut that I was like, this is one of my favorite puzzles in the game, but there's another way to break it, and I have no idea how to get rid of it. And it just like came to me one morning. I'm like, oh yeah, I can add this thing. I'm like, okay, great, this puzzle is saved. So there are definitely cut puzzles that are sort of like, lost children. I'm like, I could have saved them, right? Maybe if I just had thought longer, I had more time, I could have come up with something. But yeah, I mean, by the time you get to the end of a project, you're just glad it's done. Like, honestly, yeah.
How did you come up with a deadline?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is I am awful at deadlines. I have almost infinite endurance when it comes to like working on a game. It's like the reason I actually started this game was I needed a break from a much more complicated, longer term project. I was just like, I can't do this. I need something else to work on. So I started working on this. The way I came up with the deadline was mostly just going, okay, sort of looking at all of the things in the game and going, okay, what's a reasonable amount of time to finish this? Again, kind of with the cut puzzle ideas, it's like, would I really want to spend another year getting those puzzles in the game? Or am I comfortable cutting them if I can, finish in time? Also, part of it was just kind of like a life thing. So, it's like I wanted to work on other games, and it's like, well, even if I mostly finish this game, but every couple of weeks I come back to it and I tweak one little thing, it's like it takes up a lot of space in your mind. So I kind of just wanted that weight lifted off my shoulder. Also, I have a son that's going to be born in November, so it's like probably not going to be doing a lot of game development in November or December or January or February. So maybe, kind of wrapping it up. That said, my original date was August 31st, but I actually, I postponed it then because the Steam Next Festival was coming up. By the way, if any of you are interested in publishing your own games, do the Steam Next Festival because it gets you a lot of traffic. And so it was like, okay, look, I'll push it off till October, and then I'm eligible for this festival. So that was a reason that, I sort of settled on that date, is just like, what's the closest to August 31st, but that I still qualify for the festival. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess building on that question, how did you know when your game was not necessarily done, but ready to ship?
Yeah. Kind of a few ways, and it's a tricky question because I did like sort of go back and forth on it a lot. The simplest answer is just you're done. Like you yourself are just like, I can't do it. Like the week of ship, I'm like, I can't do another week. Like even if someone told me like, look, give it a week and like I don't know, Shroud or something will stream it and you'll get a ton of wish lists. It'd be like, nah, I can't, I'm done. I can't do it. Now, on a slightly, happier note, there is just kind of a point where, at least for me, I keep a to-do list of everything that I want done on the game. And there gets to be a point where that to-do list just starts to be more and more trivial, right? And you're kind of like, oh, okay, like, yeah, this puzzle doesn't really work. That's fine, I'll cut it. Or like, oh, there's a weird sort of animation quirk in this very particular situation that, it doesn't break the game, but it's just like, it looks weird for 2 frames. It's like, all right then, like, it looks weird for 2 frames, that's fine. When you just start to, like, narrow that stuff down, I think also a thing that helped me, maybe going off of the fact that, I rolled all the tech, right? This is a custom engine, is just when it gets to a place where it's kind of technically stable, and I'm like, okay, I put this on a random computer and it runs well, there's no game-breaking bugs, it's accessible, there's like bindings, all of these things. There is a certain like comfort level that comes from that, which honestly, I wish I had done some of that stuff sooner, where you're just like, okay, whatever the game is, it's at least technically coherent, right? There's nothing like super bad about it in that regard. And so you can start to feel a little bit more comfortable about the design stuff. It's like, yeah, maybe this area, it's a little weaker than this other area, but I don't know what to do. And the game runs. So like, what more can you ask? But I honestly don't think that's necessarily a great answer to that question, because I imagine it's very different for everyone. It probably depends a lot on what your goals are for the game, right? One of my big goals for this game was I wanted to go through the process of finishing a thing like start to front, taking kind of the smallest interesting idea that I could and really polishing it and really getting it to a place that I was happy. I think, like, when do you release your, your multiplayer game? Probably a very different question. Probably not 3 years down the line after you've tweaked everything. It's probably like as soon as it's fun and playable and you can, get people engaged. Yeah.
Having made a custom engine for this, was there any interesting challenges
Um, yes, I mean, like probably a lot. The most interesting thing, at least, is like kind of the top of the stack, right? That I've been thinking about. Doing asset system stuff with memory arenas so that the game doesn't allocate any memory at runtime. It just like you launch the game, it's like here's your memory. We just anytime you load assets, it's going into that arena and things are getting like flushed out so that there's no there's no freeing of memory, no allocating of memory to help performance. That was a fun problem, especially dealing with that when it's multi-threaded. That was pretty cool. Cool. Let's see other. Trying to think other like interesting engine problems. I mean, like the rendering stuff. Honestly, that's obviously not specific to an engine. You would, if you were rendering this in Unity or something, you would have those same problems. But they are fun when you're sort of saying, okay, like, how am I going to format like this buffer object to send over the data, right? Like, what's a nice cache coherent way to like iterate over this? What's a way to maybe save allocations on the GPU so you aren't using more of those resources, things like that. There's given the fact that the engine was not really built for this game, it's a more general purpose engine. There are a lot of other like interesting probably engine design problems, but one of the things that was nice about this project is I don't have to multi-thread pathfinding, right? It's like I don't have to deal with particularly complex save game state. I'm not dealing with skeletal animations and inverse kinematics, right? So part of the fun of this game was just all the engine problems go away, and it's just like put things on a screen and read some files from disk. Yeah. I saw another hand. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, two questions. First one, why did you choose this camera view instead of just like a pure top down?
Oh, you can toggle between the camera views. That's just a thing I skipped over. And actually, I did have it top down for a really long time. The reason I went to this other one was because the animations don't read as well from the top. It's like if a thing is rising from the ground, it really just kind of looks like it's like color fading right from the top. Like if we look at this here, right, they just kind of appear. There's a little bit more subtle sort of animation work from the side. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely a thing I bounced around on, and then decided like, oh, just let the player decide.
Got it. And another question, could you talk a little bit about the marketing you did for this?
Yeah, so the marketing that I did for this was I did everything wrong probably. So some things that I did right was the Steam Next Festival was a good thing. I did kind of all the indie stuff right. I did Screenshot Saturdays. Most Saturdays, right? I even got picked up by Rock Paper Shotgun for like one of their little Screenshot Saturdays. A thing that I did that I know is definitely wrong is you should probably have your Steam page like as soon as you're ready to show the game. By the time you're like posting Screenshot Saturday stuff or just showing the game to maybe random playtesters, you should have a Steam page, because I think the problem is like I got that attention for Rock Paper Shotgun, but it's like the only thing that people could do was follow me on Twitter, and I mean I don't really go follow random people on Twitter. I like it and move on. Whereas if I see a game, I will go ahead and wishlist it. So I think that's one thing. Just going ahead and getting that Steam page up. Doing events like the Steam Next Festival is a really big deal. Things that I didn't get to do mostly because of COVID, but I'm not going to lie and say that I would have known to do them if everything was completely normal. Like probably going to events like PAX or I think EGX is one in London, GDC, things like that. Networking with people in general. One thing I did do that was good was network with local game developers. A thing I probably should have done more with is just network with, hey, I played your game and I liked it. Talk to puzzle designers that I respect and am interested in their opinion. I kind of shied away from that stuff just because it's like, oh, I want it to be better before I like show it to them. But then it's like, you miss out on valuable feedback. You're more showing them like a more finished product, which, some funny thing, if you show someone a finished project, they're either going to be really mean Like, they're going to be brutally mean, and they're going to say, like, this sucks, I'm not interested. Or they're just going to be like, oh, congrats, good job, like, this is nice. But it's not going to be very, like, actionable feedback. So I think, I did have playtesters, like Sam was a playtester for me. And, I show it to friends and, other designers that I know. So I think networking is good to create advocates for your game. I think that's a really good advertising thing. I'm glad I did what I did. I wish that I had done more. And then, probably festivals and things like that would be good. That's it. I don't know exactly how well this game would do at a festival. I think this is on the low end of games at festivals for success. But if you feel like you can do that, you should. And honestly, you should probably just do it anyway, because what's the word? No one's going to play this at a festival and be like, oh, I remember that game changes. That game was no good. I'm uninterested. They're just going to forget about it. So, like, you go for it. Be my advice there. Yeah.
Your music and audio system, it's super like modular. How'd you make that? How did you?
Yeah. So the music system went through a lot of design rework. Honestly, like the last 6 months have been primarily working on the audio, doing some technical things, a little puzzle design, and a lot of audio work. So I wanted to create audio that was completely driven by the events of the game. That's a thing that I've always been curious about. My friend Heather and my brother and I, when we started making games like in 2014, a lot of our games were like, it was a racing game where like all of the audio was sort of from the engines, right? It's like, okay, if you rev the engine, the synth does this. If you brake, the synth does that, right? That type of idea. I mean, not the greatest implementation, but it kind of the interest was there. So I felt like this was a really good example of that because it has very clear, discrete events. It's very easy to, a character jumping is a very easy thing to do an event about, right? A character looking at an object, right, in like a 3D game, that's a very hard thing. It's like, how does the audio work there? How, what do you do? So I felt like this was a good, discrete, sort of test bed for doing that stuff. Some of the things, like the problems that I ran into with this was, I originally had it so that sort of based on the number of events, it's like you would sort of say, hey, if there were 5 births, like play all of these sounds, right? To create these big chords and things. The problem is that doesn't work when there's a lot of stuff, right? It's like there are 80 births. Well, you were not playing 80 sounds simultaneously, so you've got to sort of make some sort of concession there. The idea that I came upon, it was like, I think the day before Christmas or something, my mom had gotten wind chimes, and I was just like listening to them in the backyard. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. There's like a delay between these things. It has this it reminded me of a Zen temple, right? So the way the audio works in the game is in fact, actually, you know what? I can go ahead and pull up an example of an audio file here, right? Let's see. Look at like something like this. So I specify the audio file just kind of in this little custom language format, or not even a language, it's more of a data format. This is a big like tech advice piece that I would have. Maybe this kind of answers your question, Sammy, about the engine stuff. Writing custom data formats and parsing them is like one of the most powerful tools you have as a programmer. It lets you do a lot of really cool things. So the way the audio kind of works is for each turn, it sort of like reads from this music file, and it's sort of like, here's a list of things that could happen on this turn. And then, so it's like for each of the birth events, right, it's going to like pull from these notes, right? This is a piece of music where there's only ever expected to be one birth. Here's the list of death events, right? So we sort of say, for each death, we're going to play like, C an octave down, C an octave up for each of those, and they sort of get stretched out over time. And so that sort of process, doing the audio this way was way more involved than I thought it would be, because it was kind of like learning to play a new instrument, not only in like the timbre of the actual instruments that are playing in the game, but it's just like what things work, right? I mean, if you're like, great at guitar, that bends work really well. if you play piano, you know you can't really bend anything, right? So you've got to find another way to express some of those ideas. And there was a lot of this in the music, of just finding things. Like, my primary interest over the last couple of years has been like jazz piano, and it did not work at all. And this, like, every time I would try to do it, it's like, ooh, let's do like a C9 chord. It's just like, yikes, that's piercing. So a lot of it was just kind of working with what I had, and kind of finding things that worked, noticing things that didn't. A lot of just going through it and making sure, like, hey, does it sound harmonious all the time? Is it, are there not any dissonances? Again, dissonances, I like jazz, I love dissonances. It didn't really work in this game. It always felt like, ooh, I did something wrong, I broke the game, right? So honestly, just a lot of playing around with things, a lot of just kind of being open to ideas, like play a piece on piano, put it into the game, see how it translates. A lot of times it would translate very differently, where it's like, even if it sounded good, it would sound like a totally different piece of music that had very different themes. And that was probably the hardest thing. It's like, if I want to write a sort of like upbeat, happy tempo type of thing on piano, I know how to do that. I mean, maybe I know how to do that with like happy, upbeat tempo here, but more complex ideas, it was very hard to get to do that translation. So a thing that I started to do more towards the end that I tended to have success with was just say, don't even think about it on piano. Don't even think of like a piece of music that I'm trying to play. Just do something in the game and listen to it and see what it's communicating with you. That was kind of the thing that worked there. But like I said, there was a lot of iteration on this music system, and that's one of the big reasons I like this custom data format a lot. Is it's very easy to change. In fact, I did write a whole music editor at the beginning, like when I started working on this project. I mean, it was janky and horrible, right? So it wasn't good. It's just like, let's get the minimum thing in. But that made it very slow to iterate. It made it very cumbersome. Musicians were not enthusiastic about using it and, bouncing ideas off. So not necessarily that they would love this, but it's at least something that's a lot easier to tweak and modify and go like, okay, I want to add a new type of sound. I don't have to write any code. I just add a new sort of token to the parser and go ahead and do that. I want to go ahead and, change the behavior of these things. Like one thing that I did at the end is I made it a lot easier to write sequences of music. So it's like, this thing will loop 5 times and then move on to the next piece. That was very easy to just sort of write in the editor there. Yeah, I mean, there's probably a million other things I could say about the music, but that's all the things that are coming to me now. Any other questions, thoughts? Oh, yes.
How did you balance the game?
So balancing in a puzzle game is definitely an interesting topic. Like, one of the ways, probably talking about the design language stuff, right, is like, making sure that if I'm asking the player to do something particularly weird or strange, there are other familiar elements to it, right? Part of it is just having a strong enough tutorial that, like, once the player goes through and solves all those puzzles, they kind of feel their feet on the ground. In general, I say that I tend to balance a puzzle design more for interest rather than like difficulty, because like I don't so much, the easiest thing in the world is making a hard puzzle, right? I just throw 1,000 cells. I say, hey, you have to make this exact position, and on the 97th move, if you don't move here, puzzle over, right? So it's easy to make things arbitrarily complex. So the sort of the thing I'm looking for the most is interest. And what I do with that, right, once I feel like I have a puzzle that has an interesting idea to it, I focus a lot on, I start the player kind of towards the solution. You don't want a puzzle where it's like, the first 40 things you do don't matter, but then on the 41st thing you do, you better do the right thing, right? You want kind of a space where the player is approximately near the solution. Now, you don't want to put them right at the solution, like make the first move correctly or it's over. There are some puzzles like that, but it's not necessarily a good idea to do all the time. Another thing kind of related to that is sometimes you put the player in like a compromising position where they're able to discover the wrong thing very quickly, where it's just like, oh, okay, obviously I want to get this thing out of the way, but if I push it out of the way, right away, bad things are going to happen, right? And the puzzle's obviously not solvable. You want to avoid things where it's like it only becomes clear that the puzzle is unsolvable some way down the line. You want that to kind of be noticeable early on. That said, the puzzle game is definitely pretty hard as far. I mean, it's certainly not the hardest puzzle game that I've played. Like, Steven's Sausage Roll, I still haven't beaten that game, unfortunately. I think this is easier than that, but it's not. Again, not to rag on Portal, but Portal is, I think, a game that does a really good job about like making sure almost everybody is able to finish Portal if they're interested in finishing Portal. I don't necessarily know. I mean, I'm sure everyone could beat this game if they were like really interested in beating the game, but I'm sure a lot of people will get to a puzzle and it's just like, geez, I don't know. I've tried a lot of things. I'm not exactly sure what the insight is here. I think one other thing that gets to balancing is making sure that the insight is something that is kind of tangible, that the player could actually reason their way through. A lot of the puzzles that I cut were sometimes things where it's like you were supposed to do something, but it would be very hard to reason about how or why you would do that. And particularly because of the game of life, a lot of dynamic and weird things happen from very surprising starting conditions. So if the end result is like disconnected from the starting conditions, that's where kind of the constraints help a lot, right? So I think that's another kind of aspect of balancing where it's like, okay, guide the player to the solution. So it's like, look, if the goal of the puzzle is make this shape, that might be very hard because it's like, how on earth does this shape become that shape? That doesn't make any sense. But if the goal of the puzzle is make sure to get to this thing in time, otherwise it's going to break everything, then that becomes a little bit more like, okay, well, that limits the number of things that I can do to the shape within a certain time limit or within a certain spatial constraint. And that, I think, has done a lot to, kind of weed out a lot of, dead air, so to speak. Yeah, but it's a big open question, and I think the way you do it probably matters. It probably depends a lot on the puzzle game, right? I mean, again, to go back to the example of Portal, I don't think Portal starts you very close to the solution often at all, right? Because kind of one of the things that they want you to do is explore the space and try out all of these different things. Because, like, what are the odds that the player is going to stand at the starting location again? Probably very low, right? So you want kind of multiple vantage points for that to be clear. So it probably depends. I'm sure there are general principles, but I think it depends a lot on the game too. Anyone else? What are we doing on time? So we were going to like 9, right?
Yeah, 9's like the upper bound.
Oh, okay, yeah. If there's no other questions, I can go ahead and end it here. Oh, yeah, sorry.
For those who are just getting started in indie development
Uh-huh.
and want to do it either full time or as like a side job or something, do you have like any like tips for them?
Yeah, probably a million tips. To maybe condense it to the most relevant.
Just the top tips that every indie developer needs to know.
Yeah. Make games is the first one. It's dumb, like everyone knows that, right? But as someone that teaches, a lot of times it's like I want to be an independent developer and I've done all my schoolwork. I'm like, well, you need to make a lot more games in addition to that, right? And this is because the first games you make are just gonna not be very good. That's not trying to be mean. It's just like you're learning all of these things, right? It would be impossible to expect you to make good games up front. So make a lot of games. Make games with people. This is a big thing. Like, I am not a social butterfly type of person, but when I started studying computer science, I was very bad at computer science, and it forced me to go ask people, like, hey, what are we supposed to do on the homework? What's going on here? So getting to know people and interact with them, I think is really good. So game jams are an amazing way to do that. You make a game, you meet people, you work in a team. That's like the top 3 things right there. Another thing is, this is maybe a little bit more esoteric. When you play games, pay very close attention to what's going on in your mind and just the way that you're responding to the game and the way that the game is communicating to you. I think it's very easy. I mean, games are like the noisiest thing, right? There's tons of visual effects. I mean, we were talking earlier on, right, about kind of like you play these games and they have a ton of visual polish, right? There's, it's like all the animations, you feel like hundreds of people worked on this, right? It's very easy to get lost in the details, right? And so a lot of times problems that I notice with beginning design students is they get very lost in the weeds of, I like the plot of this game. The voice acting was great. The animations were super cool. And it's not that those things don't matter. All of those things matter, right? But you still want to you want to be able to focus on specifically how those things are communicating to you through play, because that's what games are about fundamentally. So, having great voice acting is certainly better than having bad voice acting, as far as I can tell. But, the number of times I get, a beginning design student, it's like, what do you like about games? It's like, I like the voice acting. It's like, there are way easier ways to do things that involve voice acting, right, rather than learning how to program. So having that sort of design sense of listening to things and caring and paying attention to things. And, sometimes you just develop this over time as you work on games too. But like the way that I think about 5 minutes of gameplay now is drastically different than the way that I thought about 5 minutes of gameplay 7 years ago. The other thing that I would recommend is do something other than games, right? Learn to play an instrument, read books, watch movies, go whitewater rafting, right? Just anything sort of unrelated to games, because being able to have a variety of influences that come from a lot of places, I think is really important. And it's always surprising. Like, sometimes it's very explicit. It's like, oh, I really like this thing that happens like in, martial arts. So I want to convey that idea in games, right? That can be cool too. Or like, oh, I really like the story in a book. I want to think about how that idea could be expressed in games, right? I'm going to make the Hamlet of video games or whatever. But also there's just very subtle things, right? I mean, if you look at like a master painter or an amazing writer, I mean, the level of craft and cohesion that they demonstrate is kind of mind-boggling, that someone's able to do that stuff. And it's very good to communicate to you just kind of like what is possible creatively in general, because that feeds your own work, right? For example, a film I really like is called Fallen Angels. It's a Hong Kong film. And the way specifically just the ending shot is paced is like, it'll bring me to tears like any day of the week. If I watch that, I'm just like how? Every time it's just like, how is that possible? And, I don't necessarily know what the game equivalent of that is, but it's good to know that such a thing is possible. And, that way at least I can sort of recognize it, right? So I think that's like 5 things. The other 5 things that probably also make games. Yeah, sure thing, of course. Anyone else? All right, cool. Do you have any closing comments you need to make?
Yeah, go first.
Oh, yes. Thank you.